So you're up to speed about role-playing games. Good. But I have to stress that RPGs aren't strictly about stories. The rule sets really do enable the game to feel much more interactive. Without those rules, there's no real challenge to be faced. This works on two levels. Say our intrepid group of adventurers have battled their way deep into the darkest recesses of an eternal dungeon. Finally, they meet the legendary demon at its heart. Without a rule set, the DM could simply say the demon takes one look at the adventurers and vaporizes them with a blink. Conversely, the players could also say they cause a massive rockfall to crush the demon without further ado. Working within the constraints of the story and the world make for a more compelling experience. This observation leads me to one of my main points today. I'm a librarian by day, but on the side I write fantasy novels. I might not be as prolific as some, but I've had many a conversation with some of the biggest names in the industry around writing. And when I set out to write a book, I use the same techniques the DM and the RPG players use when they set out to run a campaign. In fact, I'd argue that a novel is, in many ways, like a pre-written role-playing game. As the author, I DM the characters through the conflicts. The readers evaluate the story based on how well it's executed. Take Lord of the Rings, for example. Tolkien devoted years to setting up the backstory and setting of his novels. Through the course of the story, he focuses less on the rule set and more on the story itself. It's a common critique of the books that the Eagles should have just carried Frodo straight to Mount Doom and ended everything that much more easily. However, I'll say that it's very easy to armchair quarterback a novel. You could just as simply say Gandalf should have beaten the Balrog by not falling off the bridge. In other words, it's simple to narrate your way into or out of pretty much any plot point you find yourself in. What makes a novel successful is its author's ability to narrate that path effectively. If the Eagles took the Fellowship to Mordor and Legolas held off an army of orcs single-handedly, giving the rest enough time to run in, chuck in the ring, and run out, would the story have been as good? Would you have liked it as much? Let's get out of fantasy for a minute and turn this same theory towards something less blatantly RPG-y. How about Romeo and Juliet? You don't think of Shakespeare as a dungeon master, but isn't that essentially what he's doing when he's setting up the conflict? Two star-crossed lovers, each from a warring family, destined to die by the story's end? It would be pretty easy for Shakespeare to solve the tragedy at the end of the story. All he had to do was have Romeo and Juliet actually know what the whole plan was and then act accordingly. But stories aren't always about min-maxing the rule set. They're about making the best art you can. The best stories don't always have a happy ending after all, and true, Romeo could have just revealed himself to be an expert swordsman and chopped his way through every Capulet he could find, but that wouldn't really result in a satisfying ending for most people, although it might make for an excellent spoof. Maybe if RPGs had first been described as interactive storytelling, they might have had a better reception with the public at large. Then again, interactive storytelling doesn't exactly sound like something that's going to sell a lot of products, so maybe Dungeons & Dragons was a much better way to introduce that concept to the masses.